joining. I'll go ahead and just welcome everyone again. Thank you for joining us for today's Legal Value Network webinar brought to you by LVN and ILTA, titled Leveraging Technology to Improve the Billing Process. I am Wanda Montgomery, Program Manager for LVN, and special thanks to our sponsors, Big Hand, Fulcrum GT, and Intab. Before we get started, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded. We're using a Zoom webinar, therefore attendees will be muted in today's session. We encourage you to use both the chat and Q&A features found on your Zoom controls throughout the session. Use the Q&A feature to ask the presenters questions throughout the webinar, and use the chat feature to interact with other attendees. The opinions expressed during today's webinar are solely the panelists and do not express the views or opinions of their respective employers. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's session, Jack Recinto, Manager of Application Development at VedderPrice. Jack?
Thank you very much, Wanda. Good morning/afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on this Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day to you all. As Wanda mentioned, my name is Jack Recinto, and I will be moderating this panel of experts for our session, Leveraging Technology to Improve the Billing Process. Today's session is sponsored by Big Hand, Fulcrum GT, and Intab through a joint collaboration of the Legal Value Network and the International Legal Technology Association. I'm joined today by two excellent panelists. Let me first introduce Danette, who is an electronic billing analyst at Foley and Lardner with over 15 years experience in the legal electronic billing field. She has a strong passion for all of the puzzle pieces regarding electronic billing and a desire to streamline as many processes as possible, helping her peers along the way. Danette has been in charge of many client implementations and daily navigations with a majority of electronic billing websites. She's based in Milwaukee and open to talking about eBilling, which we're very happy to hear today. Thank you very much, Danette. Joining Danette and I is Amy Sellars, who is Vice President of Legal Operations for CBRE, the world's largest commercial real estate company. In her operations role, Amy manages the global e-discovery function. Amy has extensive experience in this space, helping to build e-discovery and information management functions at Williams, Walmart, and Cardinal Health. Before her role at CBRE, Amy served as Legal Chief of Staff and Director of Legal Operations at SunPower Corporation. Amy is also an adjunct professor teaching legal operations and a member of the Global Advisory Board of the Association of Certified E-Discovery Specialists. Before her career as a lawyer, Amy was a secondary school teacher and ran operations for arts, nonprofits, and an ed tech startup. What a resume there, Amy. Amy, Danette, welcome to the panel, and thank you for joining us today. Let's get started with our first question, shall we? Danette, let's start with you. Do you have any unique billing processes you'd like to share?
Absolutely. Okay, so one thing that we have come across pretty frequently of late is multi-payer invoices. And that is maybe a client that has had an insurance company that they've engaged in their matter to help collect or help to pay for the funds that are due. And I can explain this a little bit further, a little bit later in the conversation, but that is definitely something that has been popping up a lot more recent.
Amy, would you like to share any of your billing processes?
Oh my gosh. So I think for us, it's, we're on the other side. So we're getting a product that comes in. We are putting that data point through a lot of different approvals. One of the projects that we've had recently is trying to streamline those approvals, right? Trying to make that process a little less painful and get to payment faster. And that just means focusing on a whole bunch of different pieces of the workflow. It seems so easy, like here's an invoice, somebody pay it. But I know from Danette's side, here's the invoice part, not easy, right? Not at all easy. And then, sorry, there's a dog behind me, full disclosure. And then, you know, going through approvals, really trying to exercise our duty, right? To protect our company, to look at what we're being charged for and make sure that it's valid and that we are comfortable with it. It's very, very time consuming. It's very, very bureaucratic. So we're trying to figure out how do you streamline. So we are taking some invoices and saying, okay, at this level, we don't need an actual attorney to look at that, right? We are engaging a third-party reviewer and testing that out to see how that goes, because often attorneys will get distracted, right? They open an invoice, the invoice is 3 pages, they get a few entries in, something comes out, who knows when they'll get back to it, right? And it's not maybe the highest and best use of their time. So we're experimenting with all the ways to get this through that system a little bit faster.
Excellent. So Amy, would you like to go into our next question, which is, in your experience, what are the best ways to get the most out of your e-billing system? Do you use task or activity codes, and how do you maintain them if so?
Do we use task codes?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm.
So I think actually this for me, I'm going to have a little evangelism moment. Task codes are the bane of every practicing attorney's existence, and I get it. Okay. But I want to invite them to flip that sense of it on its head. I want to suggest to firms and to individual practicing attorneys that those task codes are gems of information that you should be using to understand how you practice, how the people who are working with you practice, how your clients need business or need services and what services they need and at what level. I know another company that turned off the L120 code. I know, right? So what is L120 in litigation? It is strategy and analysis, right? And so the problem with that code is that legitimately you could build just about everything that you did, including looking at the fuzz in your navel, right, to that code. Because everything I do as an attorney is strategy and analysis. For me as a client, that's incredibly unhelpful, right? I need to know I was working on, you know, a discovery motion, or I was looking at something that is related to how we're going to approach this deposition, or I'm trying to figure out something about jurisdiction. And all of that, yes, could be strategy and analysis, but those codes are really actually incredibly good at saying, no, there are these stages of litigation, and this activity fits in that stage. Now you can come back and you can say, you know what, on average, like 60% of our billing falls into these codes, or hey, on average, we should expect an associate to take about this long to do this kind of project. But if you don't use the codes properly, you get none of that fabulous information back, none. So I would invite people to consider those as a little bit of upfront time for a huge payback on the other side.
Amy, that's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. And one of the things that I think is really important that you touched on is just how that business intelligence, especially nowadays, that people are looking for, having that kind of detail really helps the firm with some of their overall perspectives in how financially they're doing, what matters they're specializing in, what matters their attorneys are specializing in, and where they're going as a firm in that way. So Danette, would you like to contribute your experience with this?
Absolutely. So let's see. One of the best ways that we as a firm at Foley, we have a specific team of experts that are dedicated to processing all e-billing procedures for the firm. If something comes along that's tricky or more complex regarding e-billing, I myself personally have 2 to 4 people who are as trained as what I am, as experienced as what I am in this field to consult with to get a full clarity on how to approach a tricky situation. We, for the other part of our team that isn't quite as experienced, but still is out there helping us out, we utilize Microsoft Teams to have a place for everybody to spitball ideas, to bounce ideas or rejections or roadblocks that we're running into off of each other, to see how we can be in compliance with what the client needs and what the e-billing site needs from us to get the invoices into the system. For anything that we can't figure out between the team members and between what's available in help guides online, we are encouraged individually and as a team to seek out training. So that's pretty standard with us, and that's awesome.
So just to touch on that a little bit more, Danette, with regards to the collaboration, as you mentioned, you use Microsoft Teams to kind of collaborate with everyone on that. Do you find that that's a really good way to actually work with billers and attorneys and maybe the assistants as well in order to kind of get that collaboration going? So
as far as pulling in billers and the attorneys, we try to keep a paper trail, and it's not for, not trusting what people are saying or anything to that way. It's just so that if we need to resort back to it, it's easily accessible. Like if there's an insurance invoice that a partner has to become involved in because we just cannot come through what the vendor site needs us to do, it's good to have that in an email so that we can refer back to it and save it, into a folder that is easily accessible, as opposed to scrolling through a Teams chat.
That makes really good sense. And kind of bleeding into that is our next question. What are some ways you manage outside counsel guidelines, and how do you utilize your technology to ensure that compliance?
Sure. All right. So with outside counsel guidelines, it's kind of tricky firm by firm. I'm sure that that's the case across the industry. When I first started working in the legal industry, we would just kind of take a look through, and again, this was 15 years ago, over 15 years ago, where there wasn't really many clients that were electronic billing. There were no really standard procedures that we handled. There certainly was not an electronic billing department where that's all that those folks worked on. But obviously times have changed. Outside counsel guidelines have gotten a lot more complex, a lot more intricate and specific based upon their clients' needs. So what we do is we send the outside counsel guidelines to the primary billing partner, the assistant. We have a specific department of outside counsel guidelines reviewing team that makes sure that what the client is requesting is something that we can comply with, that there's nothing, tricky underlying. Not saying that a client would do that, but you never know. They might try to slip something in because it's worked for them in the past. But then they review it, that team reviews it, the biller reviews it, and then the e-billing team reviews it. So we make sure to see if there are task and activity codes that are needed, if we're not allowed to block bill, if there's a specific task and activity code that's needed, like the L100 series, the counseling task codes, IP codes. And we actually do have some clients that have set up custom task code sets for the different type of work that they themselves need. And if we run into a rejection when we're submitting because we don't have the right task codes, we can change it on the fly, and then we report back to the biller and the assistant to let them know that the master files team needs to update our time and billing system to reflect the correct task code requirement.
That's interesting. We do have a question that was asked, and we will get to that right afterward. But Amy, I wanted to get your view on this as well before we go into answering our question with regards to outside counsel guideline compliance. Being on the other end of that, what would you like to contribute?
Wow. So when I have these moments with folks like Danette, it's really good perspective for me to remember that they are dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of documents that spec out, and I know many of the requirements are often going to be the rinse and repeat requirements, and those are going to be easy, but it is hard when, maybe one company does allow photocopying costs, right, or messaging costs, and the other company doesn't, or maybe one company allows block billing, but only for these kinds of matters, right, and not for other kinds of matters. And I have empathy for the nightmare that creates, right? I mean, it's difficult, and I think, you've got attorneys who really are focused on, I just want to provide you this service, right? I just want to do this work for you. And for me, like, all of that other stuff is something that slows me down and takes me away from the focus. I do admire, like Danette, I've seen this increase in the number of firms that have simply said, oh my gosh, this has become so complex that we now need experts in e-billing. And there's a part of my heart that weeps for that, right? Have we made this way too complex? And then there's another part that says, thank goodness people are investing in professionals who can support this. Because again, I'm going to come back to, hopefully all of that gives you back good information, right? Gives you back good information about your client, gives you back good information about which clients, frankly, I mean, are easier to work with and more profitable to work with. Y'all are businesses, I mean, I don't ever want to be fired as a client, but I also, I need that feedback too, right? You've created an untenable situation where we can't provide service because the administration is too onerous. The administration is going to continue to be onerous. I'm really sorry. And again, I hope that you can look to the bright side of that and say, okay, right. But it gives us better information about how to run our business or how to help our clients run their business. I think that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you very much. We have 2 questions actually with relation to this. The first is, what types of technology do you use for OCG enforcement? At point of time entry, within or after invoice generation, perhaps after the invoice generation, such as time check? Do you use another product for checking invoices after generation? Danette, would you like to take this one?
I would love to. Okay, so for outside counsel guidelines enforcement, right now we use, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'll just say it. For our time and billing system, we use 3E as our time and billing system. Obviously, there are so many options within that technology that you can have it work and put all of these requirements as a set mandatory piece of information before the time is released or entered. Yeah. And then it's up to obviously the timekeeper, the primary billing partner, the assistant to review that time to make sure that it is compliant with the outside counsel guidelines. When it comes to actually billing it, maybe, it's a new client, maybe it's a new matter. We didn't realize that we were supposed to have that information entered in. Just like I said, on our previous question, we can change a lot of that information in the eBilling hub to be compliant with what the client needs on the fly. But we always want to try to resort back to making sure that that requirement is set in our time and billing system from the get-go.
Yep, I get you there. Similarly, we use Intap Time for that enforcement at my firm. And how we do that is we build in those restrictions so that when they attempt to submit through there, it just fails right away and lets them know that they need to either add a task or an activity code, or there's some sort of bad language that they're using in their narratives or something like that, if there's any kind of blocked words or anything like that. So yeah, I get you there. Moving to our next question. Oh, go ahead. No, did you want to contribute more? Go ahead.
Having that requirement having those requirements set in your InTap or whatever product you use for your time entry is so invaluable. It's so helpful. And just as Amy had said previously, it's a pain in the nose to try and keep up with that. But getting that set up from the get-go alleviates so many problems. It's awesome. So good for you for having that.
So I'm going to jump in. I'm sorry.
Please.
So I'm just going to
No,
say
go.
that. So once that invoice comes into our system, right? Our system immediately has flags, right? And you can't even get past that first level review to get to somebody who's going to look at substance, because the first thing that we're looking at is, have the guidelines been followed, right? So we require only 1 month of billing on an invoice. We require that those invoices be submitted 60 days after the end of the billing period. And so immediately, right, you can create a flag. And one thing that I see a lot is people will have an expense from a previous month. They throw it onto that invoice and it immediately throws that red flag, right? This invoice is out of compliance. It isn't really, I get that sometimes, but we are definitely getting tons. I would say that on average, 80% of the invoices that come into our system flag for one reason or another. Oh no, it's horrible. Yeah, no, clearing audits is a huge amount of time. And it, like I said, it's everything from, your invoice spans billing periods because maybe you put an expense on that was from a previous thing, to it was 61 days afterwards, or you added a timekeeper, but you forgot to submit a rate card. I mean, there are all kinds of things that can just right out of the gate cause that invoice to get stuck on a guideline issue. So technology is doing that flag for us first.
Could I weigh in on this just a smidge to help out?
Right ahead.
Go.
Awesome. Okay, so we have worked with the eBilling Hub. I'm not sure when Foley implemented it, but we're in the new UI, which is great. Setting up those restrictions within the eBilling Hub, we can, based on how you prefer your invoices and what is in your outside counsel guidelines, we can set a warning flag to come up when we pull the invoice in for the validation stage of invoice submitting. So if you only allow 1 month, a warning message will come up, and you technically can submit the invoice without changing that, but obviously it's going to reject. So having that restriction set, or not restriction, but just warning, like a red flag, prior to it being sent to you as the client, we can set that behind the scenes in working with the eBilling Hub to help alleviate rejections and that pain point for us as well as for you, if you're the client.
So we should be making sure that every firm e-billing specialist knows how to avoid those flags, right? We used to have it set to auto reject, and it, like I said, it meant 80% of our invoices were auto rejected. And that's a worse headache than actually laying eyes on for a moment to see if you can clear the audit, right? So it's a nightmare either way.
Yeah, and it slows the process on all ends. So yeah, I totally get it. Our next question is, do you share a summary of the OCG to the billable timekeeper? And how do you knowledge share to those that are entering time? Danette, do you want to take this one?
Sorry. Just give me 1 second. I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
So I'll cover for 1 second. Yeah. That's so do you share a summary of the outside counsel guides to the billable timekeeper? Really interesting question, right? Because I, as the client, I don't want a summary. Like, I want you to give the outside counsel guidelines to every timekeeper working my matters, period. Like, they should read them. And as I told Jack before this webinar started, when I was an associate, My partner, who was a play it by the rules kind of guy, I mean, every client, he was like, you must sit down, you must read these. You cannot bill for reading these. You must know them. I will, and I will rely on you to be sure that our bills are compliant with these outside counsel guidelines. But then I would have other partners. So having like been taught that way, right? I'd get work from somebody else and I'd be like, hey, do you have the guidelines? And they'd be like, what are you talking about? So there's a real difference even within the firm about the respect for adherence to those, or even just kind of the consciousness of them. And so a summary sounds nice, but I would say you gotta push them out. And I know that Danette then actually does like remediation training with people.
That's exactly true. So what we do as a firm, when we receive those, obviously we send it to our list of people that are to receive it. And honestly, I'm not sure exactly how it's handled, but I would think, and again, this is my opinion, that the primary billing partner will review that outside counsel guideline and communicate any specifics to the timekeepers that they assign to work on their matters. I don't know how much that's actually done, because we do quite a bit of cleanup, but yeah.
Yeah, I would say you're absolutely right. It's kind of a mixed bag. You've got partners who are really involved, who actually follow those very closely, and then you've got ones who are a little more laxed with that. And so it may run into that. I mean, and that's everywhere. I mean, ultimately our base is we have our technology there to kind of just say this isn't going to go through. And then it's up to them to come back and say, well, why didn't it? And see, oh, it requires a task code. And if they need that additional information, they always go to their partner and say, I need a task code or an activity code for this. How do we move forward? So I totally get that. We've got another question. Some clients require narratives that include administrative details. For instance, approved by XYZ in-house attorney on date to be billed as. This can have a negative impact on narrative quality when using machine learning and natural language processing to analyze the substantive legal work performed. Have you run into this challenge? If so, have you addressed it? Are you using anything like that, Amy, on your end with regards to those narratives?
So funny that you should ask that, because that's where my e-discovery background sort of comes in, right? That's where my fascination with how those e-discovery functions can interplay. So the first thing I should say is that we don't use that, right? We are still, much like most doc review houses, right? We're still largely just eyes on. I have been massively impressed with a couple of the products that I have seen that do the natural language processing, but I have also seen the limitations of those, of applying that technology to those very, very small snippets of text, right? I mean, I think you can almost go better with like the very strict rules-based analysis than the kind of broader like natural language processing, right? Does this have, I mean, literally, does this have a subject and a verb, right? I mean, you can sort of almost Grammarly could help you on these in some cases. I think the biggest thing, so I get the problem that you might have if you're wanting to put those administrative details in, but because so many things do require approval, we hang up that invoice for so long if we're chasing an attorney to ask, did you approve more than 2 hours of research? Did you approve 3 people attending this deposition? I mean, that just takes forever. And I would much rather see it, right? Approved by, and know that I don't have to chase that person, that like you did what you were supposed to do in advance. Like that's worth more to me than the ability to scrub. And frankly, like if I am going to do any kind of that, I'm going to be dumping a crap ton of stuff in, right? I'm not running it across one because it's just not that helpful unless I'm just doing a rules-based analysis of the individual entries. So those don't necessarily throw it off in the bigger picture. I would love to see people using that natural language, like going back to my first point, it's not just the codes, right? I mean, each one of those entries is a gold mine of information. And if it's worth it to you to amass enough of it to take it out and do that kind of work on it, I think, again, you're going to get back a tremendous amount. What I have seen that has been really amazing is, regardless of that XYZ in-house attorney approval or not, the ability of certain tools to say, yeah, this wasn't L120, right? This is L320. This is L650. To go through and tell you, like, yep, your attorneys did not code any of their stuff correctly. Here's what you really spent things on. And so if you can't change behavior on the billing side to get rid of those, to get people to use those codes accurately, how fabulous that you can still have a machine tell you, let me resort this for you. Let me, right, categorize these entries the same way we do, right, when we're bucketing or clustering information in e-discovery. All right, it looks like you spent about this much on privilege review. Thank you, tool. That's awesome.
Danette, did you want to talk about some of the challenges with regards to administrative details?
Sure, absolutely. It depends on the vendor site, because there are some sites that have a character limit. CounselLink being one of them. It's a great system, a great platform, but you cannot have over, I don't know, I think it's 235 characters or something like that. I know that seems like a lot, but if we were to put information like approved by this person on this date for this purpose, blah, 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 that would cause a lot of rejections.
It's like roughly 3 sentences, I think, is what it comes down to.
Yes, exactly. But then there's other sites where, and other clients, that legal tracker, I don't think there's a character limit on that one. I have not encountered one in that system. Time metrics, I think you can enter as much as you want, but depending on who's reviewing those invoices in time metrics, they may say that it was block billed because there's so many details in that line item. So, yeah.
All right, so thank you for that. Danette, I have one question specifically for you that says, Danette, I think you said you had about 8 people that are dedicated to e-billing. How many billing partners are those people supporting? We also have a small e-billing team and they are often overwhelmed. So I'm trying to figure out if we have the right number of people in that role.
I love this question. This is awesome. Great job, Jacqueline. Okay. So what we have right now is, I think there's actually 13 specific e-billers for Foley and Lardner. We have broken it down since I have joined the firm, I don't know, 3-5 years ago, something like that, where the e-billing team does all of the e-billing for the entire firm. Foley has, I think it's 1,200 partners. I feel like that's roughly where it's supposed to be. So any electronic billing implementation that's being set up, any submission that needs to be done, any rejection that needs to be done, I'd say 98% of the accruals that are requested from clients, the e-billing team will obtain that information from the biller and the primary billing partner. And then we, as the e-billing team, will log into that vendor site and provide those totals for the client. So it is, I've been on both sides of the fence with this. I was a biller prior to becoming an e-biller. And sometimes it is, most times, just because of the way that the industry is going, it is very overwhelming to be in the e-billing department, trying to figure out the rejections and make sure that we're in compliance with the Outside Counsel Guidelines, to make sure that we're in compliance with the vendor, like the e-billing vendor sites, because each one has their own different requirements, but it's a challenge. And having the dedicated e-billing team of 13, some of us have been in the industry for a very long time. There are a couple of us, a couple on the team who don't have quite as much experience, but just being in the system, learning, that's how everybody is getting up to speed. And also having that, pillar of, not pillar, but the 3 or 4 people who are absolute experts in this field, I think helps to keep the functions going the way that they're supposed to. Great question.
Thank you for that, Danette. Moving on to our next question, Amy, can you start us off? Can you provide us with any challenging billing arrangements you need to handle? Are there any custom tools, whether vendor or developed in-house, that help you manage those arrangements?
That's funny because we were actually talking before the session about, how wonderful it is that people come up with creative pricing options and how horrible it is that people come up with creative pricing options. A lot of the systems, so what I've found is that, Danette, I don't know if Foley has like a pricing team or if Vedder has a pricing team, like people who are really trying to evaluate, probably by pulling back some of that billing information, right? But trying to evaluate how you can offer high quality services at prices that distribute risk accordingly and create opportunity on both sides. And so I see these things come in, but administering them can be really difficult. One thing I've noticed with a lot of systems is the double discount, right? So you say, all right, we're going to apply this discount, but then we're also going to do this under certain circumstances. Well, a lot of billing systems don't allow you to set up that double discount as a kind of an automatic thing. You choose a discount like program or structure and you can apply it. So great, you do a flat fee, easy, right? That goes in, that's great. Now you're doing like a flat fee, but a collar, maybe you can do it. Now you do like a volume discount and a flat fee and you're just dead in the water, right? And it's hard on Danette's side and it's hard on our side. And often you're kind of like, okay, wait, I have a situation today where I'm dealing with, there's a double discount here because the firm was trying to do what they needed to do. We were trying to do what the fee structure is, and it just, boom, right? And again, so simplicity is great, but I never want to like block out the opportunity to do cool things. And then it's just, how do you take those exceptions or those experiments and make sure that you can follow them and account for them and track them appropriately? But e-billing systems are not great at that.
Danette, did you want to add some to that discussion?
Absolutely. The e-billing systems are nice to get those approvals, but tracking those rates sometimes is a little bit challenging depending on the vendor site. Now, is it okay if I walk into how Foley handles the pricing?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So the Foley has an entire team that's devoted to the pricing. It's the pricing team. And what they do with rates is they send the primary billing partners the rates that they are anticipating or about to offer to the clients for anything that is below a certain amount to make sure that it is profitable for the firm. Rate increases are generally processed annually at the beginning of our fiscal year, unless there is like a signed specific arrangement for a client. Like let's say that this huge client has a fee structure that's in place from January 1st of 2023 until December 31st of 2024 or something. I don't know. But that is all kept in check and kept under making sure that it is something that is beneficial for the firm by the pricing team.
Excellent. And that kind of covered my next question, which was, could you tell us how to maintain how you maintain your timekeeper rates and how you adjust them? So that makes perfect sense. Anything further you wanted to contribute to that? No? All right. Amy, is there anything you wanted to mention with regards to that?
I would say, I think timekeeper rates are another thing where things get kind of crazy in e-billing systems. And I think that, you know, if we're focusing on technology, like rate cards are great, but they can also become like your address book, right? Where you have like 17 addresses for the same person because you haven't sort of wiped out the old ones or whatever. For me, I think, but again, rate cards should be super simple. You should have a rate card in there. That doesn't mean you can't like do things to offer creative incentives, but I need to know, like somebody asks me, hey, I'm thinking of engaging XYZ firm. You know, who have we used? What are their rates? One, I want to go look and see, like, do I have evals in the system, right? Because my e-billing system allows people to write evaluations of counsel in certain matters. And so I want to go look and see, like, hey, how have we done with this firm in the past? And then I want to be able to say, hey, their current rates are these, right? For our company, this is what you can expect. Now, either I can also then say, hey, they're part of a firm-wide discount program. Here's what it is. This is done, right? We have an agreement. This is it. Or I can say, this is a rack rate. You know, you can talk with the firm if you want to engage them, et cetera, but here's where you're starting. And if you're not keeping those timekeeper rate cards in your system and you're not keeping them up to date, you're not cleaning out like old special rates that were used for something, matter specific rates on things that aren't around anymore, you need to. And again, that's just housekeeping, administrative burden, right? But that's such valuable information for you and also for the firm. Like, can they match up? Like if poor Danette were to look at all the rates that I had for all her timekeepers, would she be like, what is that? Where did that come from? So I think it's timekeeper rate cards should be like almost like your statutes, right? You need them to be like up to date and clean all the time.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Amy, next question for you. How has the pandemic, if it has, changed your billing processes? And are there any tools you're considering to further improve your processes with regards to that?
So I don't think the pandemic changed our billing practices. I think the one thing that changed is maybe less ability for people to pick up the phone and call each other, right? So it used to be that I could, well, I'll reverse it. It used to be the billing person or a firm could pick up the phone and call me and reach me really easily, right? And now, you know, they might be calling my Cisco jabber, they might be, I mean, who knows, right? It's not quite the same as I'm at a desk with a landline, and I hate to sound old and fuddy-duddy-ish, but I will just do it. But I think that's the big thing. I think the pandemic changed the way people communicate, right? Internally, folks are using messaging a lot, and that's effective, but you can't actually message, you know, your partner at the client to say, all right, we got to work this out. And frankly, what I despise, no offense to anybody on this call, is when attorneys are trying to resolve billing issues. That's a stupid use of everybody's time. You got to get the ops people and the billing people together, and often you need to like screen share, or you need to like really be able to talk about something specifically. So I think that to the extent that the pandemic defrayed the ability for that kind of quick communication, emails get lost. You can send an email that's like, hey, you know, we got a problem with this bill, right? But if I got 40 of those today and yours was the first one in, who knows? And so just that picking up the phone and calling, that's the pre-pandemic thing that I think helped resolve more invoicing issues than anything.
Excellent. Danette, how has the pandemic impacted your billing processes, and are you looking at anything vendor or tool supplied to handle improving your processes?
Well, since I've been here, Foley has had a platform that is used for electronic performas generation and review. It is used by, I do not know the percentage, I'm not going to guess on that, but I think it's pretty widely used at the firm. It's awesome. It's great to be able to review them any place where your computer is remote, if it's, in a conference room, if it's at your house, if it's wherever. So that hasn't really changed since the pandemic. It's always been that way at Foley. Unfortunately, there's not unfortunately, but kind of unfortunately, there's always going to be a small percentage of attorneys that prefer a hard copy to review. And again, that has not changed since the pandemic. Let's see, as far as let's see, the firm has become more flexible regarding hybrid work, a hybrid work schedule where, there's a couple of days at home and then there's a couple of days in the office. Obviously, there's benefits to having remote work, and then there's also benefits to having face-to-face communication with your team to work out issues that maybe make more sense when you can see like a hard piece of paper in front of you, which, yeah, I think that's pretty great to have that option.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that was interesting about the pandemic is just how much we started using conferencing solutions in order to do that, like Zoom. I mean, that was the first time I ever heard the term "I'm all zoomed out," basically, because you're on meetings for 8 hours on Zoom calls and you're trying to remember everything you're going through. So yeah, I definitely see that. I guess I can agree with you both on the fact that billing was always kind of handled in the way that it has been handled. And I don't really see how the pandemic would have really impacted that per se, aside from, like you said, the hard copies. I could definitely see sending messengers to some partners' houses with hard copies of their invoices, because they wanted them. Yes. I can neither confirm nor deny that happened for us as well. So, but yeah, thank you both very much. We have some time left. We have about 10 minutes. Are there any other questions that any of our attendees would like to ask before we move forward and close this? Looks like we are pretty well set. Well, with that in mind, I want to thank you both, Amy Sellars and Danette Long. Thank you both very much for actually participating. Oh, we did get one more question before we call this. Does most of your reporting come out of eBilling Hub? Danette, do you want to take this?
We utilize, absolutely, I'm happy to. We utilize the eBilling Hub for quite a bit of reporting, but we do also utilize our time and billing system, which is the 3E platform, a lot for reporting. Yeah.
Similar with us, we're still on Elite Enterprise. We have reports that come out of that as well as we use Intap Time, and we've got reports that come out of that. Amy, would you like to give any parting words before we close this this webinar?
No, I mean, I think my parting words would be, do you remember Schoolhouse Rock, right? I'm just a bill. Yeah. I really want to redo I'm just a bill for like a legal bill. I want a little cartoon that's like, here are all the steps I have to go through, and here's what has to happen for me to successfully be paid. And so if you're wondering how this works, or if you want to improve this process, because this is a process that just begs for improvement, generally speaking, I would suggest that you, walk between the silos, like follow an invoice from like the moment of people doing a time entry all the way to the moment of being paid. So you're going to have to like go to your client and say, hey, I want to see what happens with this invoice case here so that I can understand how we can be better, at getting you something that's going to make it through your system faster and easier. And then I should do the reverse, right? I should sit down with Danette and be like, okay, let me see where are these issues with the guidelines that are throwing errors for you guys and creating problems so that we can line this up better. So I would just say this is way more complicated than anybody ever wanted it to be. That all those complications have purposes and reasons, that are probably legit. So walk it through, follow the whole thing. And then think about what data you can get out of that makes all that work worth it.
Thank you, Amy. One quick thing I wanted to bring up. If you do decide to make your schoolhouse video, I'm doing lolly, get your OCGs here.
Yes.
One last question, and I think this would be perfect for you, Amy. Overall, what are your thoughts on clients customizing codes? We really want to simplify and would love to use just 3 basic codes for our IP. Any thoughts on that?
Back to your clients. I mean, again, what information does your client need about what you're doing and how are they going to get it? I mean, honestly, like at the end of the day, if I even could get people to use the broad L's, right? L 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, right? Okay, forget all the other ones. If you would actually just plug it into a 600, like, I would know it was electronic discovery related. So maybe that is a first step, right? And then maybe you guys can work back and forth on where it would be helpful to the client and to you to get more granular. But I do think I'm not an unreasonable person most days. And so if I can understand how you're working, we want technology to do all of this, but at the end of the day, I'm sorry, the human beings must connect. That's all I will say.
Indeed. Danette, did you want to add to that with regards to clients customizing codes?
Honestly, it's personal preference, or obviously client preference. As long as the eBilling team or the master files team or the biller, some group of people at the firm understands how the client is wanting to utilize those codes or wanting us to utilize those codes, we can accommodate that request. We do obviously accommodate that request on a pretty frequent basis. So sometimes it's a little bit tricky to get those invoices set up on the initial go around, on the initial implementation of using customized codes. But once it's set up, it really, with the 3E system, with the eBilling hub, with the leads, with the vendor site, it's a pretty simple process once we understand how the client wants to utilize the codes.
Excellent. Danette, any parting thoughts on your mind?
I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the this wonderful conversation. It was great to chat with you and Amy and everybody else. So thank you.
And again, thank you both. Yes, thank you. Amy, I appreciate you coming on. Danette, thank you for sharing your experiences, both of you. Thank you to all of our attendees for coming out and joining us on this Valentine's Day. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you again on our webinar.